Ever since I can remember, we've always had an old vintage Parker Brothers Ouija board sitting in our closet, collecting dust. When I was a kid, I always wondered what it was. From the box, it seemed like a horrible board game, until one day I found out what a Ouija board really is and immediately dug it out of the closet. I insisted on my brother trying it out with me and eventually got him to play along. We put our hands on the planchette, and I began asking the typical cliché questions like, "Is there anybody there?" and "Can you answer me?" Other than my brother jokingly moving the planchette around to imitate an answer from some kind of entity, there was no real response. After getting bored, we put the game back in the box. I did a little research that night to find out how to make Ouija boards work. Many people said online that the most ideal environment when using a Ouija board is in a dark room only lit by candles. So, when my parents weren't home, I managed to gather like 6 or 7 candles and convinced my brother to try it one more time. I lit the candles and set them around the table in the dining room with all the lights out. We tried one more time. I asked again if there was anybody there. The planchette began to move. I told my brother to stop moving it, but he swore he wasn't. I told him to move his hand away, and he did. It kept moving. My brother thought I was messing with him, but I didn't pay attention. The planchette landed on the word, "Yes." I was only 9, so I was legitimately myself. My older brother had to take over. He asked the question, "Are you a good spirit?" There was a 2-second pause before my brother's hand moved along with the planchette to the word, "No." We both looked at each other, and at this point, I ran to my room and shut the door behind me, but he continued on with the so-called game. I heard his muffled voice come from down in the dining room when all of a sudden, I heard him screaming at the top of his lungs. I ran back downstairs to see what was wrong. He was holding up his shirt, revealing a small open wound that almost looked like a claw mark. He told me to set the fireplace immediately, and I obeyed. He threw the thing in the fireplace and told me to never speak of what happened to anybody. We have never used the Ouija board since. I got a call from my cousin who said that he, his brother, his dad, and his best friend were using a Ouija board in their basement. Prior to starting, they took a large porcelain doll out of the room because it was creepy and placed it in the adjacent room face down on a pile of towels. My cousin took a short break because the board was just spouting nonsense, and he had to go to the bathroom. His dad, brother, and friends started asking the board questions without him. One of the questions was, "Who is in the other room?" It just started spouting random numbers, and when my cousin came back into the room, his brother said that it wasn't working, that they were going to put it away. He showed him the answer to the last question he asked, and he said, "Dude, that's my social security number." Then they started to talk to whatever started spewing answers out. They told my cousin he would die in the Air Force. At this point, they tell the entity they're communicating with to prove itself. It then spelled out the word, "doll," and they immediately got a bad feeling. They opened the door to check on the porcelain doll they had laid in the other room, and when they opened the door, the doll was standing upright in front of the door, staring at them. Everyone freaked out and ran out of the house. His best friend burned the Ouija board, and I think he temporarily went nuts for a few months. My cousin, for some reason, then joined the Air Force and is on a base in Europe now. I had met some of my friends over one night, so we tried out the Ouija board we found in someone's garbage. It had the board and a glass piece that you hold on to. The 4 of us held on to the piece and asked stupid questions, just messing around. At all times, one of us was moving around the glass piece just to try and fool the others. When one of my friends went to the bathroom and the other got bored, it was just me and one of my other friends still holding on to it. I asked the board when I will die, and the piece started slowly moving to the letter T. I laughed, looking at my friend, thinking it was him, but he just told me that he thought it was me. The piece then moved to the letter O, and then M, and then back to O, and then R. And then I realized that it was spelling out the word tomorrow. My friend let go of it, and it stopped moving. So I was convinced that it was him, but he swore left and right it wasn't him. But here's where it gets horrifying. The next day, while walking my dog to the preserve, my dog's collar suddenly snaps, and he was free from the leash. He darted into the road, and I immediately chased after him, only to hear the horn of an oncoming car blaring and getting louder. I dove as fast as I could out of the way, just barely grazing the car with my foot as it passed. But it didn't end there. The same day, while sitting under the ceiling fan in the kitchen on full blast, I got up to get something out of the fridge, and behind me, I heard a loud crashing sound as all the glass on the table was shattered and everything fell onto the floor. The fan had fallen off the ceiling, and I was inches away from being decapitated. I really don't know if I find it to be a coincidence that the day after the Ouija board said I would die, I had 2 near-death experiences. All I know is I'm never touching a Ouija board again. I have never really told people about this. We had a huge closet full of old board games, and one of them happened to be a Ouija board. I always wanted to try it out, but my family was always home, and I felt weird trying it in front of them. There was this one weekend that my parents were going to the city, and my brother was going on a Boy Scout campout, so I would have the whole house to myself for a weekend. It might have been pathetic that I was more excited to try out a Ouija board than to party with friends while the house was empty. The weather was terrible, windy, and rainy, but I felt that a rainy night would actually make it more ritualistic. Around midnight, I set up the board in my dining room and dimmed the lights. I asked a bunch of questions that generated no answers, so I eventually put the board away and went to bed. I woke up in the middle of the night to hear a creaking noise downstairs by the front door. At first, I thought nothing of it, but then I heard it again, and it was closer this time, closer to the stairs. I sat up. Now at this point, I was getting concerned. Another creaking sound, this time from one of the stairs. I was sure somebody was in my house. This was before cell phones were mainstream, so calling the police wasn't even an option. The creaking sounds were getting closer until they were right outside my door, and then they just stopped. It felt like hours while I lay there clutching my covers, waiting for something to happen. A huge strike of lightning momentarily lit up my bedroom, and I swore I could see some kind of black limb-type objects wrapped around the open door. I tried to hold my breath to be as quiet as possible, but what happened next was the worst part. My door suddenly slammed shut, and I couldn't help but let out a shriek. But now I was completely under my covers, shaking and crying and wanting to scream. All the windows in the house were closed, so there was no draft. I just knew something was going to happen, but nothing happened. I sat under my covers for hours, thinking somebody or something was in the room with me. When the sun started to rise, I finally snuck a peek out of my covers. My room was just as empty as before. I somehow found the courage to leave my bedroom and search for any signs of a break-in. Everything looked normal, though. No broken windows or unlocked doors. I then spotted the Ouija board on the table. Again, I have always been kind of superstitious, so I immediately linked the happenings to the Ouija board. I chucked the damn thing in the outside trash can and brought it out front to the curb. Since then, nothing has happened, and I didn't tell anybody about it. You wouldn't understand unless you were in that kind of situation. Then you would agree that nobody would believe a word you say. Nobody really knows except for the people that read my story online. I know for a fact that those events were linked to the Ouija board. I can tell you from personal experience that trying a Ouija board is a huge mistake. It was the summer. My friend had a vintage Ouija board that was allegedly worth a decent amount of money. My friend agreed to trade it with me for a video game that I never. Excited about the trade, I took the Ouija board home and decided to try it out with my friends that night. We all gathered in my room, turned off the lights, and lit a few candles. The atmosphere felt eerie, perfect for what we were about to do. We placed our hands on the planchette and began asking questions. At first, nothing happened, and we all started to laugh, thinking it was just a silly game. But then, the planchette started to move. It spelled out random words that didn't make much sense, so we brushed it off as one of us messing around. However, things took a turn when one of my friends asked if there was a spirit in the room with us. The planchette moved to yes. We all looked at each other, trying to figure out who was joking. Then, another friend asked for the spirit's name. The planchette spelled out, DMON. We laughed nervously, but I could see the fear in my friend's eyes. We decided to stop and put the board away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing whispers and feeling a cold breeze in my room. I chalked it up to my imagination and tried to get some rest. The next day, I woke up to find scratches on my arms and a strange feeling of dread. I knew I had to get rid of the Ouija board. I took it to the backyard and burned it, hoping to end whatever was haunting me. Since then, I've never touched a Ouija board again. The experiences I had were too real, too terrifying to dismiss. I don't tell many people about it because most wouldn't believe me. But those who have read my story online understand the fear and the danger of playing with something we don't fully understand. The events that happened were no coincidence. The Ouija board opened a door to something dark, and I learned the hard way that some things are better left alone.